Hello and welcome to the Runners World podcast with me, Ben Hobson. In today's episodes, we are peeking ever so slightly behind the curtain at how Adidas use athletes alongside lab and general consumer testing in the build-up to launching a new running shoe. This is by no means an exclusive approach by Adidas. There are always varying degrees of claimed input from most brands when a new shoe is coming out, but I got to see firsthand how Adi approached this on a recent trip to Kenya. You'll hear me out and about talking to a few people. One of them is Joffrey from Adidas. He works alongside the athletes to get their feedback on prototypes on the roads, out doing runs with these guys, following them in buses and talking to them afterwards. So you'll hear a bit of that. You'll hear a bit of the athlete feedback too, all over a cup of tea and a mandazi after a run. And then there's a conversation with Spencer, who is the Senior Director of Sports Marketing for running at Adidas. And we talked about how product is informed by the athletes, the need for innovation, the constant push towards it, how that translates to the end consumer, and much, much more. So enjoy the episode. Okay, we're currently in a matatu, a local taxi, and we're out on the road with a couple of athletes, and we're going through some product testing, which is an important part of the whole shoe development design process when it comes to releasing a new product. So we are now following the athletes to get a gauge of how they find a new shoe. We're running in a prototype right now, and this all comes together with all the lab testing and everything like that. But to give us a bit more insight, I'm talking to Joffrey here, who heads up a lot of the design and a lot of the data management and analysis when it comes to these sorts of events. So Joffrey, what are we doing in a van?
So we're currently following two athletes in Iten, Kenya. They're wearing some of our prototypes and testing them out. And we're trying to then get their feedback at the end of the session to improve and get insight on the different prototypes that we are testing at the moment. Yeah.
And when you handed over the product earlier, the introduction to them was very brief, because you want to kind of let them form their own opinion on how the shoe feels and how it performs, and are they aware of even what model it is? Because it's kind of like the testing that you do is very kind of almost placebo based, right?
Yeah, they're running with those type of shoes every day, so I think they most of the time recognize what we are
Sure.
aiming and what we are shooting for. So here we are testing a Boston version, and so they recognize those type of versions. But you're right in what you said before. We don't say much. It's a quick intro. We greet them in the morning, thanks them for being here for testing the prototypes with us, and then we hand over the shoes and we tell them a little bit of a background, but not too much, so that the feedback is really theirs and it's not ours. And then by the end of the session, and we collect that feedback, and that's when the real interaction actually happens.
And from a session like this, you're looking really from a fit and a feel kind of point of view. I mean, you capture a lot of imagery when we're out on this sort of thing. So you're looking at certainly how the shoe performs at a variety of paces, but also direct feedback on comfort and that sort of, because you can get a lot of data mechanically in terms of performance, but this is more of a sort of on the road, how it feels, comfort kind of analysis.
Yeah, it's kind of a confirmation of what we think we created as a shoe. You mentioned fit and feel. That's the first two questions that we're going to ask towards the end of the session, because that's one of the most important feedback at first, to make sure that the athlete is comfortable in the shoe. But then different shoes are going to have different focus areas. Some would look more into how comfortable is the shoe, or smooth is the transition. But also others would look into more the performance bit and try to understand if they feel the propulsion from the shoe, if they feel that it's a better shoe than the one that we currently have. So all type of question that we would ask them.
Yeah, exactly. And then that fits into a much bigger picture in terms of, you start with a design, and then that becomes probably like a model, and then you take the materials that work and how they can be adjusted, and then you work mechanical testing, and then this testing, and then you end up with a product.
Yeah, you'd be amazed on how much people are involved behind one product. So this is one piece of a puzzle that gets into the creation and the validation of a shoe. So we are more towards the end of the creation and more towards the validation of the shoe. And that ties in really well with getting their feedback and understanding if that is validated by pro athletes, elite athletes. So one part of the puzzle, but a very nice part of it.
Yeah, exactly. And then this sort of stuff also does happen at a consumer level. You'd get not professional athletes, but you'd obviously sample with a larger base of consumers as well to get feedback on a product.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's something that is done as well, both in terms of direct feedback on one shoe, one design, one prototype, but also at the level of understanding if that's a shoe that is durable enough for the market. Yeah. And where do you feel the comfort? Is it the comfort of the upper?
No, the comfortable is for upper and down.
And down as well, yeah.
Yeah, and down.
For the sole is really.
But the sole it is hard.
It is hard. You feel it hard.
Yeah.
Is it hard more in the front of the shoe or rather at the back of the shoe?
All part of the shoe.
Okay. So the midsole rather hard.
Yeah.
Is that good for you or?
Yeah, it is good.
It is good.
Yeah.
It's good when it's hard like this for the feeling.
No, it is not good
No?
when it is hard.
You prefer a little bit softer?
I prefer to little to be soft.
Okay.
Yeah.
Spencer, thank you so much for talking to us.
No problem, thank you.
Can you give us a breakdown of what you do at Adidas?
So I'm the Senior Director of Sports Marketing Running. So my role is essentially fourfold. In other words, it's for the identification, contracting, servicing and activating of our contracted set of athletes, both in track and field and running.
And how many athletes do you currently have on book?
In the region of, and it varies obviously, but around 350 I'd say comfortably.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. I think just to talk about what we've just been doing, where we've been out in the van and following athletes on a product testing exercise. How much does that feed into what you guys do in the marketing and everything like that? Taking a product, how its athletes interact with it, the feedback you get from them, and then the end result being put out for the general consumption.
I think the interesting thing for us is obviously our athletes are authenticators. Yeah. And obviously we have to sell products, so it's the authentication that ultimately needs to lead to sales, and they play an important part of that. They're the Ferraris of what we need to do to showcase to the general consumer. Yeah. So what you've been exposed to today is an ongoing process that we use to authenticate product with them. So we'll take them out, we'll give them product, and you witnessed to today that they don't really know exactly what they're running in. And the idea with that is that we can get good, honest feedback post run for them to tell us how different it feels to another product. And I think the burning question is always, if you had a product to choose today, would it be this one or one of our current products? And that kind of gives you a measure of where you're at. So that's part of the process, and they form an integral part of what we need to do. They, like I said, they're the ultimate testers of our product, and they're the ultimate users. And so therefore, Adi Zero is our range of top echelon products, and that's what they compete in, and that you hope that ultimately that's what the consumer is then purchasing based on the fact that you've got these high level athletes competing in it.
And it's a real balancing act between providing a product that services an athlete and a product that services the general consumer, right? And today is probably slightly different because it's in the Adi Zero range, so it's more that race orientated rather than say like Ultra Boost or something similar of that sort of more general consumer. But still, the process of analysing what works and what doesn't and how it fits in with an end product has to be a very managed balancing act between servicing the athletes and servicing the general public.
It is to a degree, but you'll understand obviously that we send our athletes a range of products. Yeah. So you've got the Adi Zero Adios Pro, which is the competition running shoe that they actually race in. And with the advent of the super shoe, the general consumer is purchasing that shoe more and more because they see the authentication of people running fast in it, and everybody wants to run faster. So more and more they're leaning towards those kind of products. But the product we were testing today is obviously a training shoe, which has the same characteristics as the Adidas Pro. So therefore it's as similar as anything to that. And that would be a training shoe for them. So they would do variations and do training sessions in that. But that shoe is an ideal shoe for your general consumer to be purchasing and actually running it. So there is the connection.
Just to bring it back, you've been at Adidas for many years, should we just say?
Yes.
How have you seen the transition, the changes in distance running? I mean, you worked across obviously track and field and all disciplines, but in terms of distance, and because we're here in Iten, in the home of distance running, how's it changed for you in terms of the progression of the sport, the change in athletes, and the marketing of the whole industry?
I wish we had a few hours. But in short, I think the so-called advent of the super shoe provided an opportunity for a reset. There was a time when, that you refer to, when shoes became minimalistic. In other words, the lighter, the better. The actual drop in the heel and the actual stack height was much, much smaller than what we are now. Roll forward to the advent of the super shoe, it's now 40 millimeters, etc. And then what benefits that brings to the athletes, not only is it literally making them faster, but it's also with recovery. So that's become an important element. When we were going through the testing process with this, the athletes were telling us that they would do a long run and that literally the next day it'd be okay to do that, where previously in the low stack shoes that wasn't the case. They'd need 2 or 3 days of slower recovery runs. So that's been a huge progression in the sport, where people can now literally train harder, and therefore if you're training harder you will run faster. That's just natural if you're able to do that legally, and that's what's actually happened. And then with the reset of the rules, it provided an opportunity for greater innovation. And that's what all the brands have been, in particular us, have been able to latch onto and look at ways to make our athletes run faster. And we went a little bit of a different route, where everybody else focused on carbon plates. We have the carbon infused rods. So that was our opportunity for innovation, and we were a little different from everybody else. But we've seen the benefits of that, and the benefits for the athletes, like I said, is they can actually train. They can run faster, but train faster and longer, much quicker than before.
Yeah, and the results prove the innovation is effective. Like that's your main benchmarking of, how not necessarily a leap of faith, but when big steps in innovation come through in a fast period of time, you've got to kind of hedge your bets on something will work through scientific research and obviously very intensive, rigorous modelling and things like that. So, it must be quite it's exciting, but also quite daunting probably when big innovation leaps come forward like this.
Oh yeah, it is. And you saw today where that platform that we would use. So spending a lot of time in labs coming up with ideas, but the end user is in firstly the athletes, then to be able to come and test with them. And that first round of testing when these new set of rules were in place was super exciting, because we were bringing product that we tested ourselves and we were onto something here. But to see their reaction, because the general reaction was like, okay, we need to be doing something, and then spending that time with them and offering something that was providing them that leap in performance was quite pleasing to witness. And you saw two of the athletes that were there, Abel Kipchumba and Bethel Yegon. They were there with us from the beginning, and testing, and to see their reaction on how the product has evolved is quite impressive.
And just on the innovation front, we were actually talking a couple of nights ago, a lot of emphasis on current innovation, certainly since the super shoes have come in, has very much focused on the plate or the carbon element. But obviously with the years of innovation that you've witnessed, it's not just that makes these shoes so different. We've got the rules from the IAAF, obviously that stipulates stack height, but the foam, the upper material, everything is sort of coming together. It's not just one particular element. This is just such a bigger scale thing.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it in that there's so much focus and a lot of reference during competitions of the carbon plated shoes. And whilst, as you've correctly pointed out, that's one element of many other elements, the uppers, the different foams, etc. With the rules, which I think needed to be put in place, you were kind of put into a box. and you're allowed innovation in certain areas now. And one of those areas is, as we chatted previously, is with regards to the foam. Yeah. That now is your opportunity of how dense is the foam, how does it react, and that's your area of innovation, or the placement of the plate, or the with us the carbon infused rods, and how does the rocker work and that type of thing. So you're able to play around in that now, and your opportunities for innovations are not less, but they're in different areas. And as you pointed out, more focus on the upper, more focus on other areas of geometry. So, yeah, but it's more than just the plate, which is often referenced.
I think with the bigger leap in innovation has probably become a bigger leap in actual mass participation as well. How do you approach that from a brand point of view when it comes to what now is an athlete? Because the boundaries have changed so much. Amateur athletes now have access to stuff that they've never had access to before. They can train so closely to the professional level that they have done previously. How do you approach that that shift constantly of like what is an athlete? What is a runner? Who are you servicing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all born athletes at one stage or the other, but I think ultimately the knowledge that we're learning from the testing, etc., with our top athletes, with those competing at the likes of London Marathon, etc., is being transferred. And like I said, we're seeing a trend where that sort of sub-elite level athlete is paying a lot more attention to that product, and you'll see more and more people running in those super shoe type products, and that's then filtering through. And we're comfortable with that because, we spoke about the fact that everybody wants to be faster. That's just human nature. And you're providing them with a product that is going to help them as long as they're also doing their homework. It's not like without doing the work, any athlete still has to do the work. And so if you're just in inverted commas, a regular runner, you're still going to get the benefit. And that's the transformation that we've seen, that people are more comfortable wearing that type of product. Whereas before, what would be regarded as a training product for our athletes would be what the general consumer would be running Boston Marathon in. And that's sort of changed a little bit. There's that mindset of, well, they're using those shoes and they're running faster. I also want to. So therefore, that's kind of a trend that's happening.
Yesterday, we visited the 2 Running Club, which is an Adidas-backed sort of facility here in Kenya, just outside of Iten, actually. How do things like that help you with the development not only of product but also athletes and sort of bringing together? I mean, as your introduction when we were there, it is the most successful running group in Kenya, going on results last year, and how do you utilize that sort of setup to progress what you're doing? Yeah,
I mean, the 2 Running Club has been a club that we've been working with for a number of years now. And, they form an integral part of what we do as a brand, the testing and all the above. But you saw the camp and how well disciplined the athletes are. They're in camp and what they do. I think that resonates with what we as a brand want to sort of portray. And, like I said, they form an integral part of what we want to do. And then you see the success. The brand that won 4 out of 6 world majors last year. Adizero being the most winning franchise. And that's all part of that authentication that comes out of that. And so we like what they represent and how they carry themselves and just the values that they portray. And they play an integral part. And we have similar setups as you've been exposed to. They're one of 4 other entities that we have in Kenya and Ethiopia. And they play an integral part of being that showcase of all the work that we put in. And you'd earlier asked the question of how different the sport is, and it's not only from a product perspective. Social media has become such a way of communication. And a lot of the East African athletes wouldn't have used the traditional social media platforms that we use. And that's changing. We're seeing such a positive development where they also want to express who they are and talk about product, etc. And that's been a healthy sort of progression that we've quite enjoyed.
What are the biggest challenges that you guys face then when it comes to, what Adidas face in general when it comes to innovation and how product moves forward? Because the balance between change for the sake of change and change for innovation must be a constant thing.
Innovation, as we've discussed, is constant. You always need to find those little marginal gains. And what are those? Is that because of a knitted upper, or is it because of a foam that is differently applied in the factory instead of being molded? Is there another way that therefore that you get more response out of it? And what does response mean? Response means more, hopefully, that you run faster. What does that mean from a weight perspective? It means that hopefully that the shoe is lighter, which is maybe a request from the athletes. And in our first iteration of product, it was, from Adidas Pro 1 to 2, that was like, well, if we had to change something on the shoe, we'd want more traction on the shoe and maybe the weight. So that was the evolution to Pro 2. So those are the things that you're always looking at. And like I said, the advent of the rules put you in a box. But like I said, I still feel that was necessary. But you have marginal gains that you can look at in certain areas, and that's what we're constantly looking for.
Do you think there's a need for more change on the rules? We talked earlier about sort of products being available for purchase and the windows of what's stipulated in the month rule and sort of, but also testing versions versus final versions and stuff like that. How much is that? How important is that to making innovation fair, and how much is it limiting what people can do?
I think I personally feel that there are still areas that need to improve in the rules, but we're fortunate enough that with the advent of these rules that there's dialogue with World Athletics, which I think previously there was a limited amount of dialogue. And so that created that healthy discussion between all the brands through the World Sports Goods Federation, where we're able to have a platform and talk about possible changes, possible areas of concern. During supply chain issues that all the brands were experiencing, we had to sit down and alter, in inverted commas, the rules to just by virtue of what was happening in the world. And so they were receptive to that, and there was healthy discussion with that and an interim set of adjustments put in place. So I think that it is healthy. We like the fact that we're sitting at a table and able to talk. And the positive thing about it was first and foremost around product and rules, etc. And it's now evolving into the sport in general. What can we do to improve the sport? And those discussions are now happening, which is really healthy. We really like that.
There's always the advent of the super shoe and how the times have improved so much, and sort of how people consider the world records now fair because of that shoe. And you've got athletes who stand on the point that when they were running there was innovation that made them faster. And again, we talk broadly on innovation. Again, it's back to the shoes, but we're talking about improved nutrition, improved training, improved everything. So it's a perfect storm essentially of how the sport has moved forward, but it's coincided at sort of this one time.
Without a doubt. And it's people have focused on carbon-plated shoes. They haven't focused on the improvements that Mondo have made on the track, and the track in Doha, for example, which was like the best, fastest track that they've ever produced. But nobody actually gives Mondo credit for that. So yes, we've got super spikes that people were running in, but we also had a super track. And so that's evolved. And we spoke earlier about the fact that you talk about innovation. Innovation's always been there, and it's always going to be there. It needs to be. The human has evolved. We're not the same as what we were 50 years ago. Some years ago, we were running on cinder tracks. The advent of the spike being introduced, that in itself was an innovation. And that has evolved. So to your point, athletes have always been exposed to innovation, and you can't say that the rules now are not fair or equal, because you then can turn back and say, well, hold on.
All those times are now invalid, or they should be the actual world records, and these new ones should have an asterisk next to them or something like that. And I think that there's a point. Obviously, athletes who ran those world records that have been broken, some may be like, well, that seems unfair. I mean, if I'd had those shoes and that change and the innovation, I would have been running those times. But it's hard to speculate around that sort of that rhetoric around records.
During Eugene at the World Championships, we obviously have a number of ambassadors, and Haile Gebrselassie is one of them, and Edwin Moses, etc. And it's fun showing them the new product. I mean, Haile's first reaction to the product was like, I wish I had these because I would have run 2 to 3 minutes faster. But there's no negativity there. No. There's just almost a tiny little regret that I didn't have this because I would have wanted to run faster. And Edwin Moses was of the same opinion, feeling that the sprint spikes would have helped him run 2 to 3 seconds faster. But no negativity, just like, oh, damn, missed opportunity.
Just what a shame. But, what can you can't change the past. That's exactly that. Spencer, thank you so much for just talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Runners World podcast. I promise you, Rick, Jane, they'll be back soon. I know that's 2 episodes where it's just been me. Deeply apologetic for this. Please don't leave us some sort of scathing review on iTunes or whatever it is where you just say this guy on his own is terrible. Promise it's going to change. if you're not really upset by the fact that the other two aren't here, then you could subscribe to the magazine. That's always a pretty good idea. You can also subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. That's an even better idea. So make sure you've done that. And tune in next week. Hopefully it just won't be me on my own. Thanks a lot. Bye.